Hi everybody. So we're on to chapter 18 of Max and the Millions, written by Ross Montgomery, illustrated by David Litchfield of Faber Illustrations, permission granted to read by Faber Children, and off we go. Chapter 18. Max sat with one hand cupped over his ear and his eyes on Luke's lips. It's worked. He's talking again. He's explaining what happened. Max watched closely, nodding along as Luke spoke. He says that his people, the Blues, were attacked by the Greens. Those must be the green-haired people in the bin. Something about the flies doing it? War flies, I think he's calling them. That must be the people I saw riding that fly a moment ago. Sasha frowned. But why did the Greens attack? Did the Blues do something wrong? Max kept his eyes fixed on Luke. He says it's because of us. Because you attacked one of the war flies, Max gasped. That fly you swatted earlier must have had people on it. Sasha looked down at his onesie. There, just beside the zipper, was the squashed fly. He picked something out from the remains. It was a tiny ejector seat. Ah! Cried Sasha. Max turned back to the tower. Wait! Luke says the pilot was fine, but the leader of the Greens, the Bin King, thought Luke told you to destroy the warfly, and that's why he attacked. Sasha turned pale. You mean all this is my fault? Oh, man. Max kept his eyes on the tower. And Luke says now it's just going to get worse. He says the Bin King is going to attack the Reds. Those must be the red-haired people under the bed. And he's going to take over the whole floor. And the only thing that can stop him is... Max stopped. Through the goggles, he could see the desperation in Luke's eyes, clear as day. He'd never spoken to someone who was so easy to read before. Is what? Said Sasha. Max smiled. Is us. He's asking us to help him. Did you understand me? Luke waited for the giant's response. Like everything Giant did, it took a while for the answer to come. You just had to wait. And then it came. Luke saw the exact moment that his words sank in. It was like watching a stone being dropped in a lake and the ripples spreading out across the surface. Giant's eyes flashed with understanding. The muscles of his mouth softened. His head rose and fell. A nod. Is that a yes? Cried Luke. You understand me? You'll help us? The head rose and fell once more. Another nod. Luke leapt for joy. Malcolm, this is our chance. We can save the Blues. With Giant on our side, we'll be unstoppable. Malcolm had finally burrowed a hole through his beard, big enough for him to see through. Fine, he grumbled. We'll use Demon to defeat the Bin King. Now, for heaven's sake, offer him a blood sacrifice before he kills us. Luke blinked. A blood sacrifice? Monsters need blood sacrifices to keep them happy, Malcolm explained. Offer him 1,000 greens to start with. Luke was horrified. We can't kill 1,000 greens. Do you want to save the Blues or don't you? Malcolm snapped. Luke gulped and turned back to the giant. Thanks, Giant. We're very grateful. Do you want us to sacrifice 1,000 greens in your honour? Giant took a moment to listen, then grimaced. He shook his head. Pah, said Malcolm. He's holding out for more, the bloodthirsty brute. Right, we'll go up to 5,000. but that's our final offer. Luke sighed. Giant, what do you want? Giant held out his empty hands. Nothing, said Luke. Then why are you helping us? Giant looked confused, like he didn't know how to explain himself. Then his eyes lit up. He pointed to himself and then at Luke. He held up his index fingers and crossed them over each other. Luke frowned. It looks like an X. That's 10 in Roman numerals, said Malcolm. Good grief, he wants 10,000 sacrifices. Right, offer him 7.5, but tell him we'll have to do it in instalments. Luke looked at Giant, who still had his fingers crossed. It was like a hug or a handshake. I don't think that's what he means. I think the sign means he wants to be friends. Is that right, Giant? Giant nodded, and Luke laughed. The two of them, well, it was like they just understood each other. Luke couldn't believe it. A whole lifetime with no one to talk to except for his pet flea, and here he was, making friends with someone 1,000,000 times bigger than him. Tell him we'll sacrifice 2,500 up front, then 2.5 more on delivery of the Bin King, and then... Malcolm? Yes? Shut up. Hey, that's the sign language I showed you, said Sasha. Friends, right? Max nodded, holding out his crossed fingers. He'd never imagined that the first time he used sign language would be to talk to a boy who was smaller than his little fingernail. I'm telling Luke we want to help him, that we're on his side. Maybe then he'll stop offering us sacrifices. Sacrifices, said Sasha. Wow, these guys are monsters. Max looked down at the tiny boy. It was strange. He'd always found it hard to make friends, but in less than an hour, he'd made 2. It was amazing what happened when you talk to people. Sasha waved a hand in front of Max's face. Max, I don't mean to be difficult, but how are we going to help him? We're supposed to be getting everyone out of the room before Mr. Pitt comes back. Max looked around the room. Once again, Sasha was right. There were millions of people to save, and he and Sasha still didn't have anywhere to put them. Not only that, now the tiny people were at war. Even if Max and Sasha found a way to get everyone downstairs, the little people could end up slaughtering each other the moment they did. We have to stop them fighting first, said Max. We need someone to take charge, someone to talk to everyone and bring them together. Max looked down at Luke and smiled. We need a king. Malcolm, look! Giant's trying to tell us something. Giant was pointing to himself, then across the desert at the Bin Kingdom. You're going to destroy the Bin Kingdom? Said Luke. Is that right? Giant scrunched up his face and shook his head. He pointed across the desert again. Harder. He wasn't pointing at the bin. He was pointing at the crowd of blues outside it. You're going to get the blues back for me? Giant nodded with relief. Well, I guess that's better than nothing. Luke smiled. Thank you, Giant. We'll take it from there. We'll reorganise the army, attack the Greens ourselves, and... He trailed off. Giant was shaking his head again. Luke thought he detected a look of disapproval in his eyes. You don't want us to attack the Greens, said Luke. Giant nodded. He pointed at Luke, then at the bin, and then locked his fingers together. Again. Luke gawped. You want us to be friends with them? What? Said Malcolm. Make an alliance with the tribe that just attacked us? Giant nodded. He pointed to Luke again, then pointed behind him, in the distance, stretched a flat-topped mountain with thousands of red-roofed huts sprawled beneath it. It was the bed. The Red Kingdom. Giant locked his fingers together in another X. You want us to be friends with the Reds too, said Luke. Those bloodthirsty savages, cried Malcolm. Giant nodded. He waved his hands across the entire floor, then drew them back to himself, like he was sweeping everyone together, reds and greens and blues. Then he locked his fingers together again. Luke was amazed. He wants us to stop fighting. He wants us to come together as one tribe. Luke looked up at Giant. But how? Who's going to make an alliance with the Red Queen? Who's going to persuade the Bin King to stop fighting us? Who's going to... Luke stopped. Giant was pointing at him. Me? Giant gave him a thumbs up that was bigger than the tower that Luke stood on. You really think that'll work? Said Sasha. Max nodded, still giving Luke a thumbs up. We'll take the blues downstairs like we planned. By the time we come back up here, Luke will have talked to the reds and greens and explained what we're doing. That means we can carry them down one tribe at a time and they won't try and kill each other when we reunite them. Sasha looked unconvinced. Are you sure he'll be able to do all that? Of course, said Max. He's a king, isn't he? He turned towards the boy on the tower. The whole fate of the floor rested on his tiny shoulders. Goodbye, King Luke, Max said. And good luck. Luke waved. Goodbye, Giant. Luke watched as Giant slowly turned away. Malcolm looked like he'd aged 100 days in 1 second. Your Majesty, you cannot be serious. Make peace with the Greens after what they've done? Form an alliance with the Reds? Luke nodded. This is it, Malcolm. The answer to everything. No more fighting. No more tribes. No more squabbling over food and territory. And Giant and his friend are going to help us to achieve it. Malcolm was appalled. The Bin King is looking for you as we speak. He'll cut your head off the moment he finds you. As for the Red Queen, you won't get within a foot of the Red Kingdom before those savages tear you limb from limb. Luke wasn't listening. He was already turning away to face the vast, sprawling sands that lay ahead. Remember what you told me earlier, Malcolm? Everyone gets one chance, one moment to prove themselves. He picked up his crown and sword. Well, this is my chance. Now I understand why I never wanted to be king. My job isn't to rule people, it's to save the floor. And not just for the blues, for everyone. Malcolm spluttered like a faulty kettle. Luke, your father, he never would... I already told you, said Luke. I'm not my father. He swung his sword at the cage and split the lock in two. The door fell open. Malcolm was stunned. Luke, you're acting like... I know, said Luke, smiling. I'm acting like a king. With that, he flew down the stairs and out into the desert. There was nothing Malcolm could do except stand, speechless, in his underpants and watch as Luke leapt onto Excelsior's back, far below him. She reared up onto her hind legs, and the two of them bounded towards the horizon. Gradually, centimetre by centimetre, Luke disappeared, away from his past and his kingdom, and on towards his destiny.